Whether you're a Mets fan or not, it's without debate that the '86 Mets team is one of the most legendary clubs, certainly in the metropolitan area. 108 wins, huge names like Gooden, Strawberry, Hernandez, Carter, Darling, and so many more. My next guest, Ron Darling, he's got a new book about that magical season. It's called Game 7, 1986, Failure and Triumph in the Biggest Game of My Life. I recently caught up with the pitcher. Yeah, we'll get to the book here, and I think a lot of surprises in it, but yeah, you had a 30th anniversary. I'm curious, did a lot of the stuff come back to you when you saw some of the guys that maybe you hadn't seen in a while, or it was always there?
Well, I think it was always there. It's one of the reasons I wrote the book. Two reasons, really, is because most people think the '86 World Series ended with the ball between Buckner's legs. There was another game that we played, and that's why I call it Failures and Triumphs. The triumph, of course, is that the Mets won. A failure is that I did not pitch that well in Game 7. It stuck in my craw. I always wanted to figure out why I didn't, and the cathartic experience for me was I wrote the book.
Do you think, Ron, it's one of the many things that made you different from a lot of ball players? People know, when you win, and what happened preceding to that, that's for somebody else to figure out. You'd already pitched two great games in the series before the Game 7. Is that just like being a Yale grad? One of the things that made you different was between the ears than from a lot of guys in the clubhouse?
That's a great point. It definitely is one of my quirks, I'm sure. Most people, when they write about their achievements in sports, it's always about something great they did. I'm known for pitching one of the greatest college games of all time. I lost 1-0. I wrote this book about Game 7, and I didn't pitch well in it. And I think I really was trying to examine that there's always two sides to it. There's always a side that comes out victorious, and I was lucky enough my teammates picked me up. But there's also a side to an athlete that grows up as a 6 or 7-year-old. You're always the best kid on the block. Every single time you have a big experience, you always come through. And what happens when you're playing against the best and you don't come through? What's the reasons for those? And I guess it is. It's how my brain works, and it's one of the reasons I wrote the book.
I'm sure you felt some sympathy for Buckner, or maybe others, pointed with ridicule. But when Orozco throws that mid up in that iconic moment that no Met fan will forget, and you guys win, do you feel more relief at that point, or are you ecstatic like everybody else? I know you said it was 48 hours after the fact when finally it started to process, and it's still not at you till really you wrote the book. But what are your feelings when Orozco and you guys finally close out probably maybe the most famous World Series in history?
Well, there really was a range of emotions. I think when the Mets tied the ball game earlier, that was relief. When they went ahead, then I started to feel elation, and then just utter joy, of course, when Jesse threw his glove up in the air. I think I felt that way after the game. I felt that way after the parade. And it wasn't until, like you said, 2 days later that I kind of woke up in my apartment and said, what the heck just went on? Why wasn't I successful? I always had been in the past. But I came through the experience, and I think the cathartic part about the book for me is there were two things, and one is strictly on me, and that is because of the rain out, I think it was just a bad job of me, a paralysis by analysis. I faced the Red Sox, started against them 3 times in 11 days, and I thought that I had to come up with a new game plan to somehow get through that third start. That was a bad idea. And second, and most important, I think, it's an homage to the Boston Red Sox, who are a great team. And when you're facing a great team and a great lineup, especially a veteran lineup, sometimes they decide your fate. And I think the Red Sox that night said they had had enough of number 12, and he was not going to do what he had done the first 2 games. So really a tip of my cap to them.
People forget how great a team you guys had that year. You're going 108 games in the regular season, and there's certain teams. I know if you're a Yankee fan, you could recite the lineup today of the 77, 78 Yankees. Any Met fan can tell you who the starting 5, who the pitching staff was, who the starting lineup was of that Mets team. What do you think? Was it the personalities? Was it the storyline? Why is that team probably the most beloved Met team? Is it just because they won, or is it something more?
I think winning, of course, 108 games is a big thing. I think also having a year, now this is a Mets team in the 70s and 80s, as bad as any team could be. Team in 84 that won 90, 85 won 98, and then 108 and 86. So it was the build-up also. I think New York was a very tough and gritty and dirty town, and that team mirrored that in a way. But also, I think it was the star power. You know, you might have had the best right fielder in the game in Strawberry, maybe the best first baseman in Hernandez, maybe the best catcher in Carter, maybe the best pitcher in all of baseball in Gooden. So it was really the star power, and to go along with those gritty and dirty players like Wally Backman and Lenny Dykstra and fan favorite Mookie Wilson. There are just so many people to root for in the city of New York.
We spoke to Gooden not long ago, who talked about that obviously with great affection, but he didn't make the parade because he was dealing with his demons. When did you get a sense, Ron, that this was a snapshot and this team with all the talent that you just described wasn't built for the long haul because of the personalities you write in the book? Amphetamines and beer were very prevalent in the clubhouse. These were no choir boys. Did you know that this wasn't a dynasty? This was just a perfect kind of marriage of time and talent?
A good question. Yeah, there was a sense that this was a supernova racing across the sky, definitely. I always look at it this way. I'm always asked a couple of questions, and people say, why would you speak about the amphetamines? You know, I think a lot of players of my generation look at the steroid era, tend to look at today's game and say, boy, we never made those mistakes. We never did this, we never did that. Well, you know, I guess the reason I picked it is we did do some things that were out of bounds. We didn't play perfect baseball, and if my generation players think they did, it's not true.
Finally, the title of the book says it, Game 7, 1986, Failure and Triumph in the Big Scheme of My Life. You were there for one of those small windows when the Mets owned this city, and obviously, for all the reasons everybody knows, this has been, and I think is still, a Yankees town. What would it take for the Mets to not just have a nice honeymoon here like they had last year, but to actually make this a Mets city? Or is that even conceivable given the Yankees' history?
Well, I don't know if it's ever conceivable. The Yankees are one of the most iconic franchises in the history of sports franchises. The pinstripes are seen from here to Tokyo. So I don't know if that's important for the Mets. I think they're barking up the wrong tree. I think what you do, and the only way you build your fan base, is sustained success. So to have a run like the Yankees had in the 90s is the kind of run you have to have if you're a Mets team that wants to. It'll never take over the city, but build your fan base where people that are been your long-term fans, long-time fans, can be proud and walk with their chest out. And the people who are on the fence of trying to decide which team to root for, jump on the Mets bandwagon. That's the only way you do it.
Well, in addition to SNY, you can see Ron on the MLB Network as well as TBS National. Look at you, Mr. Media here. Ron Darling, again, the book, Game 7, 1986, Failure and Triumph in the Biggest Game of My Life. I'll be honest, one of the more unique sports books you're going to read. Ron, thanks for the time.
Thank you very much.
Up next, a terrific story. A local nun who's making a huge difference in Africa. We're going to sit down with Mary Knowles' sister, who's helping HIV-positive orphans in Zimbabwe.